Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy, your favorite daily public policy podcast from the Takshashila Institution. I'm Anushka Saxena, a staff research analyst with the institution's Indo-Pacific Studies Programme, and today I'm joined by my colleague Bhumika Sevkani, a research analyst with the program covering China's green tech and EV innovation ecosystems. Welcome to the episode, Bhumika.
Thank you, Anushka. Thank you for having me.
Right. So today, we stand at a historical juncture, one where the trade and tariff war between China and the US shows no signs of stopping in terms of climbing upon the escalatory ladder. We see that new technologies, new products, and new services are becoming mired in this back and forth, on using geoeconomics and geopolitical interdependencies as tools for coercion or compellence. And as part of this, broader feature of the world order today, we're also witnessing some sense of an enhancing partnership between India and the US. Of course, there are no sure shot statements here because we have Donald Trump in power in the Oval Office, and there is a lot of uncertainty that comes with his term and the policy making approaches of his administration. Nonetheless, I think one of the most recent and interesting components of this enhancing proximity between India and the US has been the launch of a bilateral initiative in February this year on trust, right? And it's a handy acronym, stands for Transforming Relationship Utilizing Strategic Technology. And from what I understand, the goal of this initiative has been to repackage the ideas of the erstwhile initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which was launched sometime in early January. And I guess with Trump came MAGA and trust. So now we have to deal with it. But what is new or exciting in this initiative? What does it mean for India-US relations? We didn't want these conversations to get receded into the backdrop as other components of the relationship pertaining to a trade deal in the making, pertaining to the China factor, pertaining to immigration, took the center stage, right? Even though this initiative was launched in February, we're already seeing less and less conversation on it. And so I thought today I could chat with you, Bhumika, and lay out the landscape of the initiative and focus on what's different, what are the subcomponents, what do we mean by quote unquote strategic technologies, and is this going to be that initiative that heralds India-US relations into this new and complex world order. So without further ado, Bhumika, my first question to you would be just to kind of take our listeners back to February 2025 and remind them of everything that's happened with the launch of Trust. Could you first lay the land with three key takeaways or two or three key arguments that you'd like to make about the initiative? Anything that struck out to you, and the three things perhaps that the audiences should take away at the very start. Over to you.
Right. So thank you, Anushka, first of all, for setting the ground for this conversation. So three key takeaways that I'd like to mention for this episode. First is that Trust is launched as a follow-up to the ISET. It is essentially a rebranding of ISET under the Trump administration. And second would be that it can be a tool for India to tackle its import reliance on defense, critical minerals, and in the pharmaceutical sector. We can talk about the details in each of these sectors going ahead. Third would be that it has a greater emphasis on cooperation in artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and the pharmaceutical sector. So, what we can see here is that there will be a sort of continuation from the successes of ISET in the space and defense collaboration, but trust in itself would also focus more on collaboration in artificial intelligence, critical minerals, processing technologies, and technologies for the pharmaceutical sector.
Interesting. So clearly, there are some continuations. So, in some senses, we can say that it's a repackaging. In other ways, there is emphasis on not necessarily novel, but newer avenues of at least partnership in the India US ties, right? So, where perhaps I have to quickly summarize, it's a rebranding, is in defense and space, and where there is newfound emphasis is areas like AI, critical minerals, and the pharmaceutical sector. And all of these, of course, have become security tools more than economic tools today. So, economic or technological, as it were. And so, I'm excited to unpack all of these with you in this conversation. So, you talked about how trust is similar to or different from ISET. Could you also maybe quickly talk about why it has the phrase strategic technology in it? What do we mean by that? Or at least what do you understand from that based on the components of trust?
Right. So, strategic technologies has sort of become this buzzword in geopolitics currently, essentially because of, as you mentioned in the beginning, that dominance in these technologies or a lead of a country in these technologies enables it to use its dominance as levers in geopolitics and geoeconomics to achieve its political aims, right? So, some of these technologies which can sort of enhance a nation's status on the global stage, as well as greatly benefit its economy, could be considered strategic. And some of the technologies that are covered under trust are widely acknowledged as strategic technology. So, there have been studies how artificial intelligence can impact national economies for the better, the importance of critical minerals in new age technologies, as well as defense equipments, and the pharmaceutical sector as well. So, the pharmaceutical sector came into the limelight, I would say, after COVID-19 as being a strategic domain. And so, these are the technologies that the trust initiative considers strategic and the partnership would focus on.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And so, yeah, let's look at all of these components one by one, right? And then, later in the conversation, we can talk about strategic and critical, but not in terms of technologies, but in terms of vulnerabilities, and whether this initiative will be the one to, like I said, herald the India US partnership into this new geoeconomic order where de risking is the rule. Right, so and not the exception. So let's start with artificial intelligence. As you rightly pointed out, AI has become quote unquote strategic, advantageous in terms of leverage and power for a bunch of entities around the world. And why I say entities is because it could include nation states like India and the US, and groupings like the European Union, or even norm setters like the United Nations. So what in trust is the focus vis-a-vis AI? Is it enhancing infrastructure partnership? Is it data and talent flows? Or is it broadly tech cooperation and the rest of the details are to be ironed out later? So what did you gather from the nature of the focus on AI in trust?
Yes. So about artificial intelligence, the India-US cooperation, if we were to trace back India-US cooperation in technology, defense and space have been around for a while, whereas AI remained peripheral even during the ISET years. So on top of that, past US policies like AI diffusion framework, which placed India in the tier 2 category created trust deficits. Although the current administration has since rolled back the policy, it left behind a lingering perception that India is not viewed as a core ally in the US high tech ecosystem. This backdrop made it imperative for both countries to rebuild trust and recalibrate the terms of cooperation in artificial intelligence. Now, in this context, the launch of the Trust Initiative marks a significant diplomatic shift. India brings to the. So, before we move on to what trust entails for cooperation in artificial intelligence, I'd like to talk about what India brings to the table in this partnership. So, India brings to the table its engineering talent, digital scale, and digital scale in terms of a wide base of users of technology, of applications that are built on top of algorithms and AI models, and the sectoral diversity. So while these trends India has to offer, its R&D ecosystem, particular to artificial intelligence, showcases a lack of technology transfer from lab to the field. That is, basic research is not being translated into entrepreneurial activities in the field of artificial intelligence. This gives us the areas of cooperation for India and the US to focus on. Now, the Trust Initiative, the joint statement per se, mentions a broader collaboration on artificial intelligence and establishing American data center infrastructure in India. So, while there must remain a continued focus on basic research conducted by private and public R&D institutions in India, capital through this initiative can also be diverted to boosting entrepreneurial activity. And this can also act as a foreground to set norms and standards in the use of AI applications in national economies. Now, another advantage that India has from the AI development triad, the triad which is compute, data, and algorithms. Another advantage that we have is the sheer scale and diversity of data. Although it is currently unstructured, it can be modeled to develop sector-specific applications. However, Indian policymakers need to be cautious around data privacy while moving forward with this in the cooperation, which can also act as another standard setting exercise. Lastly, India's large and diverse service sector offers the perfect ground for end user applications. So, the role of government here will go beyond establishing American data center infrastructure and providing access to AI hardware accelerators. It has to ensure seamless collaboration between the stakeholders of AI innovation ecosystem through reduced barriers and nudging the private sector to invest in R&D in the domain of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, makes sense, Bhumika. So, what you're basically saying here is that, look, trust opens up an opportunity for collaboration with the leading power in various pillars of AI and ML, which is the US. But India has a lot to do domestically. And until and unless, we have private sector participation incentivized, not just in basic research, but also the application of that research to, like you said, business and commercial ideas, unless we have maybe openness to an entire ecosystem that makes up AI, cloud compute, and other infrastructure, right? We won't really be able to see the partnership through or make good use of it. So, yeah, that makes sense. And of course, with the AI diffusion rules, again, the other thing is that we must again look inward. India must look inward and question if it really is a bad omen that India was, listed in the second tier, where, there was a bit of an apathy that was evident in the US policy. So, is that really a bad omen? We should ask that question, because what do we have to offer in terms of critical partnership in the AI domain to the US? Like you said, we have certain advantages. We have engineering talent, land resources, some degree of investment in energy, which can be produced to power data centers. But will that be enough to incentivize US companies in the face of the availability of maybe other alternatives? Remains to be seen, right? So, yes, it's definitely a good sign that the rules and the tier system has been rescinded, but a long way for India at least to go to be able to make it a mutually beneficial partnership. Cool, Bhumika. So, yeah, another thing I guess you talked about was critical minerals, right? And now this is the big kind of question today. China has the world's largest processing capability. It is also increasingly showing willingness to use critical minerals as a tool for coercion and compellence, or create a lack thereof as a tool for coercion and compellence. So, and both India and the US have some form of or the other of reliance on China in the critical minerals domain, including lithium, rare earths, so on and so forth, right? So in this regard, maybe in your opinion, can trust help India and the US de-risk and subsequently collaborate?
Absolutely. So I think that the Trust Initiative can help India in not only de risking its supply chain in critical minerals, but also sort of positioning itself as a supplier of critical minerals, which will happen over a long period of time. But the Trust Initiative can help in kickstarting that move. So, talking about reliance on China, China is the largest mineral mining nation and has also gained substantial control of processing and refining capabilities for critical minerals. Now, this control is most pronounced in minerals that are fundamental to modern technologies, including lithium, cobalt, graphite, and rare earth elements, which are vital for manufacturing advanced technology products like EV batteries, wind turbines, and solar panels. So, China also dominated the share of refined material production, which showcases its refining capabilities in these minerals. For example, 90% of graphite and rare earths and 75% of cobalt are currently refined in China. And if you were to talk about India's dependence, let's say for lithium, 82% of Indian imports of lithium come from China. So, our reliance on China for lithium is obviously due to its global dominance in lithium processing. So, and if we were to look at the scenarios to de risk our lithium supply chain from China, countries such as Australia, Chile, and Argentina, which are major lithium producers, exist, but we would need to significantly invest in domestic processing capabilities in order to de risk our critical mineral supply chain from China. Now, these investments and processing technologies can come from the US through the Trust Initiative. Silicon, lithium, and titanium are particularly important due to their use in semiconductor manufacturing, energy storage systems, and defense applications. Currently, however, developments under the initiative only covers recycling or recovering lithium, cobalt, and rare earths from heavy industries. So, a good way forward would be to initiate joint investment and co development of mines and processing facilities in these resource rich countries. Another advantage for India through the initiative is being a part of the multilateral partnerships that the US has created for securing resilient supply chains. It can also be seen through India's induction in the Mineral Security Partnership. So, this is how trust can benefit India in inducting India in this supply chain network, as well as establishing processing and refining facilities in the country.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting pitch, Bhumika, because trust itself as an initiative does not necessarily have to have provisions on joint mining and production. Maybe there can be an exchange of technical know how on processing and use. But the interesting bit could be India's inclusion by virtue of being a part of the US ecosystem of alliances in initiatives like the Mineral Security Initiative, which could enable India to, be part of multilateral institutions surrounding this that aim to build, quote unquote, non-red resilient supply chains. Again, like I said, by virtue of being a partner of the US through the trust. So I think that is an interesting avenue that opens up. And as far as ambitious ideas go, yeah, totally, if there can be co-ownership of mines or co-ownership of processing facilities even beyond the boundaries of US and India, but by virtue of partnership between the two, that can be a good enough strategy, right? Especially considering that China also invests in ownership of resources of critical minerals in countries abroad, and then it takes those back to China and processes them there. So I think co-ownership in addition to co-production and processing could be a really interesting angle to explore under trust as well. And as far as uses go, you talked about a couple important critical minerals that trust should focus on, and defense I think sees a lot of use for some of these. In addition to that, I guess the India US defense partnership in general is gaining a lot of noise and continually making the rounds. I think last I heard, Indosex was kind of the go-to idea for collaboration in the defense ecosystem, and then there was talk of a jet engine co-production deal, although I don't know if the knowledge transfer from the US has happened and what the status of that deal is. But in any case, why do you think trust had to focus on defense? I know already India's main export to the US was defense related components. I mean, one of the main exports. So, why was it necessary to include in this novel initiative?
So, one of the reasons to include the defense component in the trust initiative, apart from the existing Indo US defense ties, was also India's dependence on Russia for its arms supply. So, this is another crucial role that the trust initiative can play in reducing India's dependence on Russia for these arms supplies. So, if you were to just look at it, although we have significantly reduced our dependence on Russia for our arms imports, it still stands as the largest arms supplier to India. So Russia accounted for 38% of imports, but this was sharply down from 55% in 2015 and 72% in 2010 to 14. But on the contrary, the imports from US do not see a larger share in India's defense supplies. So currently, only 11% of India's defense imports come from the US. We mostly diverted to Western suppliers such as France in the recent years. Some of the US defense imports for India's inventory include aircrafts like C-130J, C-17 Globemasters, helicopters such as Chinooks and Apaches, Harpoon missiles, howitzers, and MQ-9B drones. So, these efforts of India in further shedding its reliance on Russia can be accelerated through the Trust Initiative. Moreover, the joint statement also mentions that the US would expand defense sales and co-production to India, strengthening interoperability and defense industrial cooperation, which was, as you mentioned, initiated through Indosex. So partnerships under Indosex would continue under the Trust Initiative as well. There have been plans. So the joint statement also mentioned plans for co-production of Javelin anti-tank guided missiles and Stryker infantry combat vehicles. The plans for this are to be laid out this year. The US will also be reviewing their respective arms transfer regulations, including the international traffics in arms regulations to facilitate ITAR rules to facilitate co-development and technology transfer. Negotiations for a reciprocal defense procurement are also expected to be initiated this year, which will enable countries to treat each other's defense suppliers at par with domestic suppliers and streamline procurement processes in both countries. So, in continuation with partnerships under ISET, Trust Initiative will also promote private sector partnerships in co-production of systems, and hopefully we might witness technology transfer better than ISET in this initiative. Recently, Anduril Industries and Mahindra Group also announced a partnership to produce advanced AI-enabled counter-unmanned aerial systems. L3 Harris and Bharat Electronics also announced that they will be co-developing active towed array systems. So it is expected to see more of such partnerships going ahead under the Trust Initiative.
Right. Pretty cool, Bhumika. So you've given some solid examples and kind of a bucket list of ambitions as to what trust would like to achieve in the defense partnership ecosystem. Of course, for India, one of the challenges with any Western nation has always been transfer of technology. And I think the conversation will become much more interesting than, what you've currently talked about, which pertains to import diversification and private sector collaboration. I think the conversation will become much more interesting if it also comes to partnering in technology transfers, right? Because that's where the journey on to co-production and stuff like that starts. And it's also one of the reasons why India really prefers Russia as a partner. Because if you look at examples like BrahMos, this is a place where India and Russia can truly jointly produce stuff, right? Because there are lesser restrictions on technology transfer. So again, can trust uh, literally build trust in that sense remains to be seen. Quickly, Bhumika, I'll come to one final aspect of the initiative that you talked about, which is pharma and active pharmaceutical ingredients, right? Now, that isn't necessarily technology, but it's a technological catalyst, if I may. And dependence on API imports on China is a very general global problem, I feel, and includes India and the US. So, what does trust claim to offer on this front?
So on the pharmaceutical industry, the aim under the trust initiative is to increase manufacturing capacity in life-saving medicines to avoid drug shortages during crucial times. India has notable strengths in cost-effective generic drug production and is commonly known as the pharmacy of the world. These strengths are built on an existing network of manufacturing units and skilled workforce available in the country. So the facilities within India are also compliant to international regulatory standards, including the US FDA standards. And one of the aims, as I mentioned above, under the initiative is to encourage investments from Indian pharmaceutical companies into the United States, which I think would be time and cost intensive. So, however, existing capabilities of India can be utilized to achieve this aim without the need to invest in the US for manufacturing facilities. So instead, the focus can be shifted to reducing the reliance on China for active pharmaceutical industries, APIs of both the US and India, as well as key starting materials. So 45% of Indian imports in API currently come from China. And India then has been a crucial supplier of API intermediaries building on top of these. So this reliance can be addressed through investments in research, academia, and industry partnerships, as well as collaboration in building industrial clusters to support the entire process, starting from raw materials for the medicines to supporting logistical requirements of the pharmaceutical industry.
All right. So, interesting stuff again, with the regulatory compliance of Indian facilities with FDA standards. You could see still a bunch of challenges emerging. There can be other quality control measures in once the product is produced and it's placed on the market. And these have indeed been issues that have led Indian pharmaceuticals to be looked at more carefully in the US and even in other parts of the world. So, yes, trust definitely gives an impetus in that sense to the idea of de-risking in the pharma and API domain. And India is a value adder, right? So this is potentially something India can offer to the US as part of the initiative as well. But again, the whole conversation begs the question: is this dependence something to be rid of? How vulnerable are India and the US if they are dependent on China? And what can the partnership achieve beyond just the China angle? Perhaps this could be addressed in another conversation. But Bhumika, this has been a fascinating chat, and it's like a nice reminder and refresher course on the Trust Initiative. Because, like I said at the beginning, it felt like it had receded somewhere to the backdrop among other conversations, especially the bilateral deal between India and the US. But one final question and your concluding thoughts. We can safely say that geopolitics and geoeconomics are in a new moment. And so I guess the real question is trust able to truly build trust in the India US partnership above and beyond China? Because we know that Trump's administration is riddled with uncertainties, and China at the same time has also been a driving force for the increasing proximity between India and the US, especially under the preceding Biden administration. But so, with the complexities and the dynamics today, is trust going to be the messiah or the savior, as it were, for the India US partnership? Your final thoughts, Bhumika?
That is an interesting question. So I'd say that trust essentially continues the long-standing India-US partnership in various sectors. However, can trust go beyond China? So while a shared reliance on China offers this imperative to collaborate between India and the US, I think India can build up those capabilities and gradually locate itself as a crucial partner to the US over a longer period of time. And even if the trust initiative has evolved on the sidelines of China's threat, I think it is an opportunity for India to grab and take whatever incentives it can from these initiatives.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that, Bhumika. I guess this is a nice point to conclude with. And, as far as strategic technologies go in today's day and age, from the US's perspective, trust is, just another one of many pillars in their small yard high fences strategy, right? And the yard just keeps getting bigger, so it's high fences still, but also bigger yards. So as the list of strategic technologies, so to say, keeps on expanding across the world, and as alternative partnerships, alternative supply chains continue to be the norm instead of the exception, I guess, trust may just have a hard time finding much to do beyond de-risking from China. Of course, like you said, in the longer term perspective, it truly may be able to herald a closer ties between India and the US. That is, if it is done right. In any case, thanks again, Bhumika, for the excellent context setting and the insights. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into another episode of All Things Policy.
Thank you, Anushka.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.